Everyone to our board meeting. A particular welcome to our observers. And this is the first time that we have been able as an organisation to be able to open our meeting up so that it can be publicly observed by anyone rather than it having to be recorded and uploaded. So particular welcome to our observers and partners. I know that Scottish Government and our trade union FBU are here, and the inspectors intend to be here at future events. The public, of course, are also welcome. Can I also welcome our new board members? We obviously have 4 new board members joining us for their first public board meeting. Angelina Foster, Paul Stoddart, Stuart Ballingal and Steve Barron. You're very welcome. It's their first public meeting, but as we all know, we've had quite a number of opportunities to meet and talk in the last 6 weeks, formally appointed a month, but meeting and talking for the last 6 weeks, which has been fantastic. Can I add my congratulations to you all in being appointed to this board, but also congratulations to Angelina Foster, one of our new board members, who has also been appointed as the chair of Public Health Scotland, which is a fantastic appointment for her, but also for us as an organisation, which should provide a really excellent link across the public service. Obviously, Steve Barron also sits on that board, so it feels like we're very well connected as an organisation that focuses on prevention and protection. I think we've got very significant areas of overlap and commonality with Public Health Scotland, so that I think that's a brilliant new collaboration at non-executive level, having already worked closely with them at executive level. We are in a stage now where I think we can run through our apologies. We've got apologies from Liz Barnes, Ian Morris and John Dickey from our senior leadership team, but they are adequately supported by, more than adequately supported by other colleagues in the senior leadership team and from other executive areas as required. So that said, I think that's us welcomed and our apologies are given. Consideration of and decisions of any items to be taken in private. We have 2 items being taken in private. Our liabilities paper, which was a late addition, which is added, and also our minutes from a previous private meeting. Were there any other items on our main agenda that we think need to be taken in private, or do we think either of those items should be taken in public? Or are we content on the basis that we've got the balance right? I'm taking from that the nod that we've got the balance right and we are doing everything in public that can be done in public. Thank you very much for that. Do we have any declaration of interest from any board members or executive colleagues? No. Lovely. If any emerge during the course of the meeting, please indicate and we will manage them as required. That takes us then to the minutes of our previous meeting, which was the 24th of June. Can I ask first for any issues of accuracy that you would like to raise? Brian.
Yes, thank you. Brian Baverstock, board member. Yes, Kirsty, just one very minor point and then a slightly more substantive point. Okay. Just that 11.11 in the last, it talks about the next scheduled RAC meeting being the 8th of August. I believe that should be the 14th of October.
Yeah, that we can easily amend. Thank you.
The next point, which I think is a little bit more important, is at, sorry, I'm just scrolling down.
That's fine, take your time.
Yeah, at 15.9, where we talked about late changes to the budget after it had been approved. And John gave us a very helpful explanation of the background to that. But I thought we also agreed that we might try and look at ways to avoid that situation reoccurring, so that we would look to see whether we could do something around the timing, so that at the point where it comes to the board being approved, we're not going to get material and what we're fairly immediate changes to it. So I thought that might have been reflected in the minutes.
Thanks for that comment. Brian Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brian. You're quite correct. We did have that discussion, but the discussion, I remember correctly, was that we would then discuss it at the board strategy day, which we have done. So it would be useful to have that note reflected in the minutes to say that that's where it was discussed, and it would then be brought back to the board should it be required at a later date for approval. And I don't think it was required. It was something that we would then consider for the 22-23 year, and would clearly be dependent on when we receive the draft budget from Scottish Government, and as we discussed at the information day for this financial year that we're currently sitting in and the previous financial year that we have just exited, both of the draft budgets came to us at a very, very late date. So you'll remember we discussed at the information day that the budget came to us in February this year, against compressed timelines. So whilst we'll do everything that we possibly can to ensure that we follow a due process that gives us plenty of time to talk about the way the budget's structured, we are a little bit dependent on the reality of what's happening at a national level. I believe John will correct me if I'm, or John Thompson will correct me if I'm wrong in this. We are already starting to think about how we discuss the budget strategy at the strategy day at the end of September with you as a board. So we've got some very, very clear parameters, and we'll pick up all the bits and pieces around that strategy day development and then bring it back to the board formally if we're required to do so.
Brian?
Yeah, just to say I'm absolutely content with that. I certainly wasn't looking for anything retrospective, but just in terms of a record of that point would be helpful, I think. But thanks, Martin.
Yeah. So we can say something along the lines of that we would seek to avoid this difficulty, and that we would further discuss it at a strategy day, and that captures it. Ali, can I invite you in just for a second, because I think there was a date issue that you just wanted to flag. Apologies, Ali's having to try to find his mute.
Yes, it was just in regard to the Audit and Risk Assurance meeting detailed there by Brian for the 4th of October. I think it was just an error in terms of it should be the 8th of July as opposed to the 8th of August. So in reference to that meeting that was referred in the minute, so it was the next meeting following the March one, so it was the 8th of July, just to detail that. Thank you. Yeah,
so it was referring to a meeting that has since passed as being the next meeting, but it's just to do with our timing. So we'll make sure that that's accurately reflected. Thank you. Were there any other issues of accuracy in the agenda, or are we content to approve these as an accurate record? Stephen and nod, we're content to approve. Thank you very much. Were there any issues that anybody spotted in those minutes that we've not captured fully in the action log before we move into the action log? Did anybody spot anything? I'd say usually these minutes and the action log are extremely tight, and we very rarely have that, but just in case. But I can see nobody's indicating. So with that, that takes us into the rolling action log, and Ali will take that as through that. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So just running through the action log itself, you'll see from page 103, the summary, we have a total of 5 actions, 4 of which have been marked blue as completed. So just to confirm that the board are content with the position statement updates and for these to be removed accordingly. That leaves 1 action, which is in relation to the meeting on the 29th of April 21, item 12.3. And the status of that, just looking for the target date to be extended just to allow flexibility, and it's in relation to the annual governance review of the board and committee related items in regard to the financial and performance monitoring, and just the discussions took place at the strategy day, and just for further input regarding this to be taken to future strategies and possibly away days. Thank you.
Content on that basis? Malcolm.
Thanks. Very minor point. Sorry, Malcolm Payton, board member. On item 16.4, the last one, you're saying meeting has taken place and agreed development. I wasn't quite sure what meeting that was. So just more for future reference to try and ensure if we're saying that a meeting has taken place, we're clear about what meeting it is. It may be the same as the one in the update above, but I thought that would be helpful.
Yes, I think it is the meeting as above. So we could add the word aforementioned meeting, and then that clarifies. Thank you for that. Ali, decision log, have we got, do you want to refer to that?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing other than the fact that the board are content with the decisions that have been captured accordingly, and that no amendments need to be made regarding that at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Content in that case to agree our action log and decision log as accurate records with no additional amendments. Lovely, thank you. That takes us into the Chair's update. As usual, I've got extracts from my diary pasted. A couple of things I'd like to highlight, and then I would welcome any questions. The first one I'm sure Martin will also refer to, but the most impressive one in my memory is the Kilbirnie Street commemoration, which Martin and I attended yesterday, along with Paul and Angelina from the board, to remember the 7 firefighters who died in the Kilbirnie Street disaster 49 years ago now. As always, a solemn and moving event, which was more limited in attendance than it usually would be because of COVID. But despite that, we were able to have a guard of honour, a presence from the heritage organisations, and our chaplains able to offer some words of thought alongside our chief officer. So commemorating that and being able to join with some of the families, because of course, with it being only 49 years ago, there are family members and firefighters from that day who are still alive. So being able to join with them and commemorate and remember some of this, their family members in the service that they gave. We've also had an opportunity this month to meet with government. We had a long and substantial meeting with the Minister and with our Scottish Government colleagues, alongside myself, Fiona as Deputy Chair, and some of the senior leadership team, just to update them on where we are with a number of important issues. As you know, myself and Martin, other members of the executive team, meet very regularly with the Minister and with government, but we were able to have a more substantial period of time to talk about our visioning and our future for the service and some of the plans that we'd have over the next few years. Very productive meeting, and we will be updating the board fully on that at a session at the Strategy Day at the end of September. That will include presentations that we shared with government, just so that we've all seen the same things, and also an opportunity to discuss in some detail some of the thoughts that we've got before we get to the stage where, as a board, we will need to be making any formal decisions. So it will be an update before we get to a decision-making stage. The final thing that I wanted to highlight really are the ongoing things that I've been doing. I've been spending some time with our new board members. Obviously, they were quite a substantial induction, but we've also had the opportunity for Fiona and myself to meet with the new board members and get their initial impressions of the organisation. We all know that when you join a new organisation, lots of things strike you, and we really welcome fresh and diverse perspectives on that before they're fully inducted into the ways of our organisation and begin to lose some of that independence and freshness. So we've been able to capture some of that, and as always is the case when we have these kinds of meetings, we will tie the main themes from that day into some of the work that we carry into our development days and our strategy days, both in terms of specific items, but also just themes that as a board that we like to focus on. Things like being able to remain strategic, making sure that we're really good partners, and thinking reflectively about our governance and our performance measures. So there are a number of items that we are currently reviewing a draft of that document, and at some point that will come to come into the board planning processes and be shared with our senior leadership team, so that we are all on the same page, which is always helpful. I don't have anything else that I need to update you formally on, so it's an opportunity really to make any comments and ask any questions. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Tim Wright, member of board. I just thought I was reading through your commentary and that of the chiefs, and you make mention of exercise VEPSISH, and I confess that I was at a loss as to what exercise VEPSISH was. So if you would indulge me and remind me what that is, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I did update very briefly on that at the last strategy day, but you're quite right, it's clearly in our diary. This was a multi-agency exercise which was in preparation for COP26, and an opportunity to work with partners and to make sure that we were all well prepared in advance of that. That's what that was. I have to say it was a fascinating and very interesting day, and the opportunity for the senior leaders of different blue light and other organisations to come together, practice, learn together and share frank conversations, I think is absolutely invaluable. So I know that there were lots of lessons identified, and there will be lots of lessons being learned well in advance of COP26.
Thank you. Apologies for my my brain fade at that point.
No problem at all. And as I say, it's a rather unusual name, so it's not particularly memorable. Any other comments or questions? No. With that, we will note that, and I will hand over to Martin for his Chief Officer's report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and very much a very warm welcome to the new board members as well. It's delighted to see you, and I know the strategic leadership team have thoroughly enjoyed spending time with you, and I'm looking forward to doing the same as well over the next month or so. In terms of my diary update, there's only one thing that I'd like to draw attention to in addition to the things that the Chair has mentioned, and that's the meeting that I attended that the Minister called in response to the drownings that we had about 3 weeks ago. You remember there were 7 over one weekend, and we've got a subsequent meeting with the Minister in about 3 weeks' time. On behalf of the service and you as a board, I've again committed our resources to doing everything that we can to ensure that we reduce the numbers of drownings across Scotland's waterways. It's an exceedingly difficult task. We have 185,500 kilometres of coastline. We have about 140,000 locks. And the issue that we have and that we all are facing is the ability of anyone to be able to get on the water by ordering something from a very well-known online store that will deliver to your door. And you can then go on a waterway and you don't have to wear any PPE, and you don't even have to know how to swim to go on water. So there's a lot of work that's going on, and Alistair Perry, who's the head of prevention, is doing a load of work on this, leading for Stuart Stevens, ACS Stuart Stevens. And we are making sure that we provide all the additional resources that are required to Water Safety Scotland to ensure that the right structures are in place to coordinate the water safety education work that's going on. It was a really useful 2-hour meeting with the Minister, and I'm certainly looking forward to the meeting in the middle of September when we then report on progress. I'm going to just pause there on my diary because that's the only thing I want to draw attention to for you as a board. So if there's any questions, Fiona.
Thanks, Martin. Fiona Thorburn, board member. I was just interested in the 12th of July Future Vision course in Windsor. I just wondered if you could say a wee bit about what was involved in that. I've
forgotten it went back as far as then. I apologise. So the Future Vision course is run by through Birmingham Leadership Institute, which is part of Birmingham University. It's an invite-only leadership course for chief execs across the whole of the UK, and bring us together a public sector, private sector chief execs to explore the leadership and to explore leadership challenges, modern approaches to how we do leadership, successes and failures, things that we should learn from each other. It will culminate in spending 5 days at Harvard and MIT next spring with a cohort where we explore the cutting edge of leadership as a cohort. So I've been doing this now since early part of last year. It would have normally been done by now, would have already been to Boston to visit Harvard and MIT. but it's been delayed due to COVID. So it will appear fairly regularly in my diary. That was the first meeting of us all getting together at Cumberland Lodge in Windsor, and it was a really quite it's quite a moving experience doing it, getting together, and also then sharing our experiences of leading either small or national organisations through COVID and some of the challenges we found both at a personal level and at a corporate level, and how we've overcome them and how we can support each other.
That's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to hearing how Boston goes then. Brilliant. Thank you.
I'll be bringing a report to RANSC in November, which sets out the whole of the Boston or the whole of the leadership course and the learning, and also what I'm expecting to do as a result of going to Boston and bring back, so that there's real clarity about what we're doing.
Thanks.
Thank you. If there are no other questions on the Chief Officer's report, we will note that and move to the... Sorry,
Chair,
on you go, Martin.
Yeah, could I just bring in a couple of other things I'd like? So I've got
yes,
just
please. Apologies.
No, that's fine. Useful for the board to know. I gave you a really comprehensive update on the 29th of July, so I'm not going to do that again. And I know Debbie will be really pleased in terms of taking the minutes. I'm not going to do that. Just to say that we are continuing to support the Scottish Ambulance Service and providing drivers for their ambulances. If you read the Times, you'll have seen a headline banner in the Times over the last couple of weeks of us doing that. We will continue to do that all the way through, well, for as long as Scottish Ambulance Service require that. And that's going exceedingly well, extremely well supported by firefighters across the country. And we're receiving very positive feedback from firefighters who are actually undertaking that work. Two other things, or one other thing that the chair's already mentioned, Kilburney Street. You'll have noticed, without doubt, the job that we had in or adjacent to George IV Street Bridge in Edinburgh on Tuesday. It was an extremely complex fire due to the age of the buildings involved. I'm not going to go into the operational detail of it, but what I'd like to just pass to you as the board is that ACO Stevens attended the incident and was there for a good part of the day on Tuesday, and has reflected back to SLT the exemplary performance of operational crews both at firefighter and supervisory officer level in dealing with what was a complicated, complex fire in extremely challenging conditions, both internally and externally because of the heat of the day. We left the scene just after 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon at the height of the fire, so the sort of 33 hours period-ish. There were 70 appliance movements into and out of that particular incident, and that was on top of what has been a very busy 48-hour period for the service anyway, across the whole of the country. And if you've been looking at the DIBA, you'll notice that the numbers are going upwards and have been going upwards steadily for probably about 6 weeks or so, higher than the average. We now have left the scene in the hands of Edinburgh City Council and our FI teams that are in place and will be in place for some time, we believe, just trying to work out where the source of the ignition was. I don't plan to give you any more operational details on that because it's not something that I would brief you on, but I want you to know how well the crews performed, because I think that's really important. They were very, very good on the day and certainly brought the fire to a good, well, incident to as good a conclusion as we could possibly have brought it to. And then in terms of my risk look forward and look backwards, my last report to you, I highlighted 3 risks around command and control futures, MTA and our preparations for COP26 and the health and wellbeing of staff. You had a comprehensive update on CCF and MTA and COP26 at the board information day. CCF remains on my risk register looking forward because there are some significant concerns around the ability of us to put CCF into place. And we've had the digital audit office in service over the last week, and they'll be providing a report to SLT, which will come to the appropriate service delivery committee in due course. One of the headlines from that particular report was they do not believe there's anything else that the service can be doing at this time to ensure that Sistel deliver what we have asked them to deliver. I sort of expect some of this when we get to the nature of a project of this complexity, that we are wanting something and it hasn't been delivered yet. So I will continue to keep you informed, and ASO Dicky will do that, as you well know. The other pressure or the other risk that I've got looking forward is the pressure on our capital budget. And this is our ability to spend our capital budget in year. And this is due to the impact predominantly of COVID shortages across the world that we're now seeing significantly impacting on us as a service. So that's in terms of building materials, that's in terms of appliances and equipment. So we'll discuss a little bit more about that with you at the strategy day and what we're doing and how Ian is managing to bring forward items from capital spend in future years across the capital programme that the board have agreed, but the impact that that's going to have on the capital programme next year and the year after, because there's always impacts. At the moment, we are broadly in about the right place, but we're finding increasing pressures, as I'm sure a number of you will experience on other boards that you attend. And this isn't just down to, this isn't just us, but it's across the whole of the UK. We're finding significant pressures. So that's a risk that we're managing as well as we can at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions on either of those, Chair, but other than that, that's the end of my update to the board.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from any other board members? Okay, thank you. Duly noted. Deputy Chief Officer, Change Portfolio Update. Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and morning, colleagues. Ross Haggart, Deputy Chief Officer. I'm conscious of the fact that Fiona is going to be given an update to the board on the last Change Committee meeting, which took place on the 5th of August. So I'll not cover off anything to do with the actual portfolio itself, and I'll more focus on the development work that's ongoing in relation to the wider development of the portfolio office. And I'll probably focus that round about a Change Committee workshop that took place on the 20th of July, which was attended by Fiona, Brian and Mary in their roles then as committee members. I'm conscious of the fact that there's obviously new committee members coming onto the Change Committee, and that'll be the first of a series of workshops so that we can continue to work with the committee going forward as the portfolio office develops. The workshop was led by Andy Main, who's the new head of portfolio office. At some point I'll stop referring to him as new, and he was supported by Gillian Buchanan within the team as well. The main areas covered were firstly the participant expectations of the workshop. Clearly I can't speak for the other attendees, but certainly my own expectations were fulfilled for the workshop, and hopefully that was the same for the committee members as well. Andy outlined his early assessment of where the portfolio office is in terms of its maturity, and that's been based on discussions that he's had internally with SLT, with senior management board colleagues, with his own team, and of course his own expertise that he brings into the organisation from a number of years managing portfolios, programmes and projects. And of course we've now added to that the views of the Change Committee based on what was discussed. Andy outlined what he sees as the key opportunities for development within the portfolio, and there's 8 areas that Andy's identified for developing the portfolio, and I'll just very quickly run through those for the board's information and assurance regarding that development work. The first is to design and develop a standard PPM change life cycle framework, so we've got a change life cycle in place for all of our change programmes and projects. Creation of a dependency management approach and strengthening our approach to dependency management, both within the portfolio and across the wider organisation. Developing our suite of reports, and we'll absolutely do that in conjunction with the Change Committee so that the reports that are coming forward through the Senior Management Board complement how we will report into the Change Committee on a quarterly basis. And that will look at key trends and performance information across the portfolio. The fourth area is design a programme management allocation model to support career development, both for people who are dedicated within the Change Portfolio team and also for wider colleagues that engage in this work. The fifth area is to strengthen our approach to finance across the portfolio and greater partnership working with finance business partners, so we have a greater handle on financial resources and indeed financial benefits that can be gained through our change portfolio. Andy is also considering the portfolio management tool or tools that we can use in order to modernise the way we work, and he's looking at that from an interim basis and is already doing some work on an interim basis pending getting some more comprehensive tooling in place to support the change portfolio. He's developing our approach to resource capacity planning, which I know is something that has been the focus of the committee, and it's something that Andy's seeking to strengthen. And the final area is the development of a digital strategy for the portfolio office, particularly in relation to a knowledge management system. So those are the key areas that Andy shared with the committee and that he's working on to develop by way of a roadmap to make improvements to the portfolio office. What Andy's also doing is he's also looking for quick wins, and he's integrating those quick wins within the wider programme of change that he's implementing within the team as well. And the final thing that he shared with the committee during the workshop were some indicative potential structures, both interim, medium and longer term structures for the team to support the enhancement of the portfolio office as well. So that's what we're working on at the moment in terms of those improvements in that roadmap. I'll pause at that point and take any questions from the board. Thanks, Chair.
Any questions or comments? Stuart.
Hey, good morning, Stuart Ballingal, board member. Thanks, Ross. Just a very quick question in all of that. As part of the work, are we going to be looking at what a clear definition of change for the organisation is to what all of that process is going to apply to, or do we already have that?
We're probably at a tipping point, to be honest, Stuart, in terms of the change portfolio. We've got quite a number of ongoing fairly high level programmes of work, such as the service delivery model programme, people, training, finance and asset systems, and there's also some other property projects ongoing as well. But I think overarching that, we need to have a refresh of our strategy for change going forward, and a refresh of the whole portfolio approach, and probably strengthening the overall approach to a portfolio as opposed to what is essentially a collection of programmes and projects at the moment. So that's definitely an area that we're going to be strengthening at a strategic level, so we understand the significant change that we're going to propose for the organisation over the next few years, and it very much ties in with the future vision, the consultation of which has closed recently, and the final version of that will be published shortly.
Malcolm.
Thanks, Chair. No, very pleased to see this and the breadth of the approach. In a sense, I think the fact it does bring it into a kind of portfolio approach, which is great. And it was really just that positive comment, and particularly to I loved it. Like to see capacity planning in there. That was really good, because I think that's something that we've kind of mentioned at various points and we've had some assurance of, but I think it's really good to see it as something specific going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Angelina.
Thank you, Angelina Foster, board member. I think, Ross, my question is probably a slight partner question to Stuart's, and it is, does this improvement work include an intention to develop a very clear set of criteria for the formal transitioning of work and activities currently badged as change into business as usual? So it's the why, whether, when, and against what more qualitative measurements will it then become more core business? Thank you.
Yeah, and that's all part of that whole change life cycle work that's been worked through, Angelina. We've got criteria at the moment that we utilise to determine whether something is termed as a significant change project, or whether it's a project that's managed within a directorate, or whether it's just business as usual. But we need to develop that a wee bit further so we fully understand the the level of support that can be provided by the portfolio office and the level of resourcing that we need to put into change. So that's absolutely all part of the change life cycle that's been developed by Andy, and that whole approach to change management and how significant change projects then morph into business as usual, and the transfer of responsibilities will all be captured through that work.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. Good to know.
Thanks. Before I bring in Fiona, Ross, I'm not asking for a date here, but can I get a sense of what kind of timeline we're working on for the development of that work?
Yeah, the development work, the timeline for the development work is something in the order of about 18 months. And what Andy's done is he's very much prioritised it on a needs basis, but also combined with how quickly he can bring in certain elements of change and the quick wins that I spoke about, and also what is a logical ordering of the change that he's bringing about. So there's a number of factors that are informing that prioritisation and that timeline, and I'm more than happy to share any further information with you, Chair, in relation to that.
Thank you. It was, so I wasn't clear in my question. It was more about, you mentioned changing our approach and thinking about how we might describe, define and put into a strategy how we were going to do change. It wasn't so much what we were doing, it was more about that reframing, refreshing how we approach change. It was more about when that might come to us for consideration. And as I say, I'm not expecting a date. It's, you know, is it weeks, months, or whenever?
It's in the realm of a short number of months, Chair, in terms of bringing that forward. I see Paul's put his hand up. He might have greater detail.
Yes, Paul, please come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to build on that specific point around the change cycle and the development of it, that is one of the areas, key priority areas that Andy is working on, because we are looking to bring that change cycle into all of the major areas of work that we're going to be progressing through the organisation. So whilst I don't have a specific timescale, I agree entirely with the Deputy Chief Officer in terms of that will be within the next 2 or 3 months, and looking to get it in through the normal governance process or through the Change Committee, site at SLT, and then onto the full board should Fiona deem that to be appropriate.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Paul. Leslie, you're wanting, now your hand may have just disappeared there. I can't see. If you're still wanting, Leslie, please do come in.
Yes, I will. Thank you. My question was around Leslie Bloomer, board member. My question was around how the changes that Andy is bringing in can be applied in support of the current big projects. How is that going to happen? Thanks.
Yeah, in terms of the changes that Andy's making, Andy's spending a lot of time at the moment meeting with all of the existing programme and project managers. He's attending all of the programme and project boards across the organisation, and as changes are developed at a portfolio level, they will absolutely be used to support ongoing programmes and projects as well. And the suite of reporting, for example, that we start implementing, that will feature across the whole of the portfolio once that's all in place. So yeah, it's not as if we're just going to take this new approach for new programmes and projects. It will be absolutely embedded with the work that's already ongoing, Leslie.
Okay, thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you. As an attendee of the session on the 5th of August, I just wanted to observe that, I was massively encouraged by the work that's been done today. I think Andy has brought a professionalism and a kind of real drive to this, and I want to recognise that and commend that, but it's also a team effort for those in that team also. But what I also want to remark upon is how visible the commitment and effort from the senior leadership team is in putting its weight behind this, because quite often, you know, functions like portfolio offices are kind of seen as a backroom activity, and that's not the sense that I have now. It's front and centre, and I think that's a fantastic achievement. That was a really helpful addition, and I think all of us who attended that workshop would reiterate how impressed we actually were with that session, and the step change I think we've got with the increased capability and capacity now that we've got within that area. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Is there anything else, Ross, or are you quite happy that we have now fully noted your report?
There's nothing else for me. Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much to board members for their questions and the very positive comments. I'll certainly feed that back to Andy and the team. Lovely, thank you. And to yourselves, because the second part, of course, of Brian's comment was the support from the senior leadership, and not just thanks from, to Andy for that. Excellent. We're about to go into the committee reports, but just before that, I'm going to beg your tolerance. I'm going to ask if we can possibly take a very small additional item, and that's to approve a minor change to our committee membership. We've recently we have a proposal to do a small change in membership. So this would involve Fiona Thorburn moving from the Service Delivery Committee onto the People Committee. This is to support her chairing of RANSC so that she's got the connection between those two committees. And to make space for her there, Angelina has kindly agreed to move from the People Committee onto the Service Delivery Committee. This has been agreed by both the individual committee members who are affected, but also by the chairs of each of those committees. So if the board is happy to approve that, can you please indicate now? Lovely, thank you. That's the formal change of committee membership agreed. With that, that takes us now into our committee reports. And we've rejiggled the order a little bit so that we've got a little bit more continuity from the report from the change portfolio into the change committee. So Fiona Thorburn is going to lead off with her report on the change committee, please.
Thanks, Chair. I hesitate to repeat things, but I do think it's worthy of commenting on the workshop on the 20th of July and just how excellent it was. Everything that particularly Brian said is absolutely valid. And I would also just like to point out that a lot of good work has already gone on in the months and actually years coming up to this, but it was always difficult to get it really resourced fully and with the focus and necessary input, and we've absolutely got that. So I repeat, thank you very much to the team and Ross and Paul and Andy and all of those involved. It was an excellent session, and we're already looking forward to the next ones. So change committee on the 5th of August, the minutes aren't available yet, but I'll just do a quick trot through of the kind of main elements of the portfolio that were discussed. We looked at the value added statement, some tweaks to that, and that will be agreed shortly, hopefully. Safe and well, we looked at a change request, we looked at the emergency services network slippage, the service delivery model programme. We had what I found a particularly encouraging update on the people training, finance and asset system from Paul McGovern, the programme manager for that. And I just wanted to pick out a couple of things that he spoke to the committee about, one being the emphasis on talking and listening to the front line in terms of what is actually required for this very complex and significant piece of work. So that was very encouraging. And also when we were discussing the possibility of one or more packages off the shelf, if you like, and that's still all to be defined. But Paul was emphasising again the importance of the message to the staff of adopting software packages and not adapting them. So that is particularly important because, as probably many of us around the table know, it's easy enough to put in a software package, but if you don't properly train and educate and put the processes in place, people may revert to doing things like they've always done and adapt. So adopt, not adapt was a particularly important note as well. Those were all in the public session. In the private session, we discussed McDonald Road and some of the challenges that exist with the contractor at the moment, and these are being progressed. And we also had a session on command and control futures. And as Martin's already referred to, there was a detailed update on that at the last development day. And we continue as a committee to keep a very close eye on that programme and offer our support and scrutiny as and when needed. And just a word on the future, on command and control futures. We're actually going to have a small session with Angelina and Stuart, who are two of our new committee members, to pick their brains in terms of command and control futures and the experiences they've had in implementing large-scale programmes such as this. So we look forward to holding that in the next few weeks. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Any comments or questions for Fiona? No. Thank you. We note that. And that takes us into audit and risk assurance. And Brian, you've both got your minutes, but you've also got our annual report to the board. Over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you. You've got a very detailed minute, so I'm not going to go through this commentary in any great detail. The first item I want to refer to is indeed the annual report, which we'll talk to in the next agenda item. It's the time of the year where we receive the annual governance statement, and this is produced by Martin as accountable officer. And I have to say, once again, it's a particularly comprehensive document, and I would describe it as an exemplar across the public sector, and particularly satisfying is the very positive assurance that records across the ranges of assurance needs. A great deal of our time at the last meeting talking about matters to do with internal audit, which dominated the agenda. We had the progress report for the year 2021, and perhaps slightly surprising, all the reviews for that year were concluded despite the interruptions caused by COVID. So that's, I think, testimony to the work of the auditors and to the organisation for accommodating all of that work in a flexible manner. So that was really splendid. And through my involvement elsewhere, I can say that that's not the case elsewhere. So that's a very good outcome. We looked at 4 audit reports, expenses, policy and procurement and tendering. Both were generally satisfactory, so good assurances from these. There were another 2 reports on estates, asset management and maintenance and operational equipment, and 1 or 2 issues were raised round about the assurances and the controls in place there, but work is in hand to address this. So that was positive. Although there were points to raise, it was encouraging to hear the actions that were being taken in response. Then we had the internal audit annual report, which is their summation of all of that effort. And importantly, that report requires the auditors to express an overall opinion around the effectiveness of governance, risk and controls across the organisation. And I'm pleased to report that that opinion was a clean opinion, so they were satisfied with all of that. They did raise, as you would expect, a couple of areas of concern, which we already are aware of through earlier reports. And that was around, ICT, data security and stuff to do with asset management, which was picked up in the more recent reports that I've just referred to. But again, nothing that I would describe as a major concern, just thing that's on the watch list and is being addressed. We looked, as we do at every meeting, at the corporate risk register, and once again I want to kind of just record my appreciation for the effort that's been done, that this new system of risk management is really becoming embedded well. There is a bit of work which is ongoing around developing the format of the outputs from that system that will come to the board and to the committee, but it's important, you know, that we take collectively a bit of time to make sure that we get that right. We also had a very good report from HMFSI, of course, Robert Scott as our new Chief Inspector, and it was similar but different to previous reports. It was very comprehensive, but it was also the commentary round about that report that I think the committee was greatly encouraged by. And for example, the restructuring of the inspectorate to align to the senior leadership team, I think, is massively encouraging. So is too the commitment for the Chief Inspector and his team to work more closely with the board and committees. So I think that's very much welcomed, and I guess all of that is culminating in a real sense of working to support the organisation along a continuous improvement journey, as opposed to auditing the organisation. So we were greatly encouraged by that. So that's all I want to say on the minutes. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Brian. If there are no comments or questions, I think you can move to the annual report.
I think Nick perhaps has
Apologies,
a question.
I can just see Nick, you've just put your hand up. Thank you. Apologies.
My apologies, my hand went.
We're struggling to hear you a little bit, Nick.
My apologies, Kirsty. After all that, my hand went up in error.
Thank you. And thank you even more for not inventing a question just to cover your embarrassment. In that case, Brian, please continue with your annual report.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Kirsty. And keep your hands on top of the table, Nick, away from any buttons. Yeah. So yeah, the annual report, this is the equivalent of the committee's value added statement that other committees produce, but there is a requirement that an audit committee produces this in the form of an annual report. So that's what you have before you today. It very much ties into the annual governance statement that I've just referenced in my update, and it summarises the assurances that the committee has received and therefore is able to pass on to the board and to the accountable officer. The assurances are largely over internal audit, external audit, matters to do with governance, risk and internal control. I'm pleased to say that over the course of the year, and this is supported by the opinion of the internal auditors, these assurances are, broadly speaking, very satisfactory. The report also takes the opportunity just to look briefly ahead to what the committee thinks is likely to feature heavily on its agenda, and perhaps not surprisingly, the fallout of COVID and its implications for risk across the whole organisation is something that the committee will be taking a keen interest in, as will the issue of cybersecurity, which I think is just one of these major issues now that will never go away, and it's important that we continue the effort, and we've seen the potential issues that can arise through the reports that we've had around ICT data security, but again greatly reassured by the efforts of the organisation to respond to these. So from the committee's perspective, a satisfactory report, which we're asking the board should note.
Thank you. Content on that basis to note. No further comments or questions? Noted, fine. Nothing more then from audit and risk, Brian. That's you completed your reporting. Thank you. We have a place marker as for the People Committee. We have not had a meeting of the People Committee since the last board meeting. We're able to welcome Vary Wiley as the new chair of that committee, but given that there has not been a meeting, we have no paper or report from that. Similarly, we have the Service Delivery Committee as a marker. Nick, would you like to make any comment?
Thank you, Chair. Nick Barr, board member. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Right, lovely, thank you. Yes, I would actually, Chair, because I feel there are a couple of important issues that we'll be talking about next week, and I'd just like to bring the board's attention to those. We'll be meeting at Wednesday. It'll be another virtual meeting, sadly. We've got an extremely full agenda. We'll be looking at a new format of performance reporting. We'll be looking at 6 updates from the Hmfi Inspection Plan update reports. We've got the standard, the UFAS review project, a report on clinical governance progress. We've asked specifically for a quick top-level report on AED, automatic external defibrillator usage, on a broad perspective across the service, and we'll be looking forward to having a look at those that report. And we'll obviously be looking at another update report from the Grenfell Tower Action Plan. Our spotlight risk on this occasion will be water supply and the Scottish Water and the relationship and the good work that's been going on from there. And that follows on from a report that we did quite some months ago. So it'll be interesting to see the update from there. And we've got a presentation on the operational strategy review and the changes there. We'll be looking at our annual look at complaint handling and annual statistics. And I've already spoken to the head of comms about that. One point to note for members, particularly new members, is that we'll be having a private workshop session. The Director of Service Delivery has and the team have kindly agreed us to walk us through fire safety enforcement, and that's open to all members of the board from 13:15 to 14:15 on Wednesday. That's my brief complete, unless anybody has any further questions.
Lovely, thank you, Nick. We will take all the committee papers and reports now as noted. That takes us into the annual procurement report. And John Thompson, I believe you're going to take us through this.
Thanks, Kirsty. John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement. So I present the annual procurement report for the financial year to 31st March 2021. First of all, I'd want to recognise that it reflects the efforts of the service as a whole in delivering its procurement activity, and the achievements reported reflect the support and the resources deployed by all of the directorates in that year. In other words, it's not just a procurement function report, it really reflects the activity of the organisation. Scottish Government's guidance requires us to produce an annual procurement report within 5 months of the year end. The annual procurement report was well received and scrutinised by our Good Governance Board on the 28th of July and by SLT on the 18th of August. The board will hopefully recall a presentation that I gave on sustainability elements at the board strategy information session, so you'll perhaps be relieved to know that I won't go into the details around sustainability again. Moving into the report itself, on the kind of covering report at the 3.2, I would highlight that there has been 34 regulated procurements last year, and that totaled just over £42.8 million. I would also highlight that actually 83% of our procurement spend is done through collaborative contracts, if I can get my words out, which I think is actually quite a tremendous result when we talk about true collaboration. Well, we are collaborating on our procurement activity. In terms of 3.6, we are also making sure that we continue to invest in our procurement resources. And we know that procurement is an area where it's challenging to get resources, and we also know that there's more that we can do within procurement. So we're investing in the procurement area to make sure that we can support service delivery. At 3.9, 3.91, just highlight that 62% of our supplier base is SMEs, and that's important. We want to give access to SMEs, and therefore 62% of our supplier base means that they are registered with us for contracts, etc. And also 46% of our spend is with Scottish suppliers, which again I think is a good result. In terms of cash flow savings from our procurement perspective, they total 1.77 million, and that's primarily as we have late particular procurement contracts. We track any cash flow savings that we could identify through that procurement activity. The final thing that I would want to highlight in terms of the annual procurement report is that we have a constant battle to try and ensure that we reduce our non-contract spend, and we have successfully reduced some of that spend by £500,000 last year, taking that down to 5 million overall, 6% of our overall position. And that's probably me in terms of the annual procurement report. I would open it out for questions from the board members, please.
Malcolm, and then Leslie come in after, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, again, not surprised to see the really positive report here against a whole range of criteria. I don't know how you manage so many different things you're trying to achieve. So that is really quite remarkable. One or two things that I'd like. One is I wondered if it'd be useful at some point to put in some information about previous years. I found it very interesting reading through it. But one of the questions that popped into my head a couple of times was, how does that compare to previous years? Has there been a change? So not to hugely increase the amount of work that goes into it and overdo that side, but I think that would be maybe quite helpful. The second point is more of a question, which is when it comes to some of the performance measures. The page I'm looking at in particular is the one on Appendix B1, is it? Portlethen, page 121 of our overall papers. And many of the criteria you're achieving or exceeding 100%, local labour, and you mentioned SMEs earlier. But when it comes to some of the smaller things where the target is one person and or two people, the number of women in employment, the work experience under 16, number of Black, Asian, minority ethnic, how do you manage these things? Because it's obviously difficult to do them, and I'm presuming you're kind of not writing them in tender documents totally explicitly. So I would just welcome some more thoughts on that. And while I've got the floor, one final one, which I probably won't be able to find, but oh yeah, I think my notes say it was on page 138. In the portfolio, the programme going forward for 22-23, I was a little surprised to see 4.7 million, not for just IT work, but specifically for Microsoft. I mean, we don't normally specify one provider, if you see what I mean. And I know they've got a bit of a monopoly on things, but I just wondered, should we not be saying for, desktop tools for an environment or whatever? It just seems slightly strange having really quite a large amount of money for a licensing programme and more than a year in advance identifying. And I know that you can still get different people to provide that, but sorry to come at you with two or three things, but I'd welcome your thoughts on these.
Okay. Thanks, Malcolm. Going back to the point about previous years, it's a good point. We can consider referencing against previous years. I suppose we are tied a wee bit in the sense that the annual procurement report is a kind of legislative document, and it sets out exactly what we need to actually do to comply with that. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't go beyond that. And in fact, you know, an area that we another thought process, and one that we're going to go do going forward, is you'll see that there is references around performance indicators, and we don't include the targets around those performance indicators, but as part of the new procurement strategy, we are making sure that we're putting those targets in, so we would therefore include that going forward as part of the future annual procurement report. But so therefore, I guess what I'm saying is I'm happy to kind of take that forward, Malcolm, and consider that, if that's okay. But it's quite a lengthy document as it is, so hopefully if I can just make reference to kind of key points in previous years, I wouldn't want to duplicate too much of what's gone on in the past. So
I would absolutely agree with that. I think we you know, we have one or a few key points might be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. But I do get your point, and I take your point on board, Malcolm. So thanks for that. On your reference to community benefits, what we do at the start of the contract, or when we're working with the contractor, we agree up front, well, what are the areas that we are going to target? What are the things that we are going to make sure that you can deliver as end output from this particular project? So whether it be Port Lethen or whether it be McDonald Road as good examples. It's, I suppose it's through that targeting process that we can then identify, well, look, we'll try and actually make a difference in these particular areas. I don't know that actually translates into them absolutely thinking it through and saying, well, look, what does that mean for a BAM or whatever? But I do know they have those discussions earlier on in that kind of target setting process. So I think that maybe partly answers your question, Malcolm, but probably not fully. But that's the best I can offer at this stage, in terms of your point. And the final point, Microsoft Office, and unfortunately we're tied to Microsoft almost, and there is a sizable amount of money. The fact that we're using stuff today, everything is Microsoft Office across the estate. The advantage, I guess, is it's software across the whole enterprise, and we're using the whole range of Microsoft products, and not actually taking on board other products and kind of as part of that. So hopefully we do get value through Microsoft, but I think your point's valid about why did we identify it specifically as Microsoft Office. So we'll pick that one up.
Thank you.
Kirsty, I think you were on mute, but will I come in now?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Please.
you. Okay, thanks, John. It's really good to see this report. It's really, it continues the milestones of reports that we get in procurement that demonstrates the strengthening of the procurement function and performance, which is really good. I particularly welcome, noted and particularly welcome the progress in driving down the non-contract spend. That's really good. I've got a couple of questions, please. The first one is page 82 of the big pack of the page 82 of 237, and you talk about the environmental investment here. Now, clearly, this is never more important than now. So it's great that we're doing this, and we need to do it. The payback in carbon terms is outlined in the report, and that's really good. And I'm just wondering if we're getting to the position where we can see a financial payback, and be interested in that against our own funds and against all the public funds, because I know we're very good at getting grant funding for this. And just if we are getting to financial payback figures on some of these carbon measures, are those included in the 1.77 million savings? My second question is much simpler. So I'll just mention that now. It's just in page 136, there's a forward procurement relating to immunization to the value of 700,000, and I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Apologies, I was clicking merrily and was clicking in the wrong place to take my mute button off. So Leslie, thanks for the question. you're right in the sense that we do give information around carbon and about carbon reduction, because I guess that's the significant factor that we're trying to deliver against in terms of our carbon management reduction and our plans. I chair the Environmental and Carbon Management Board, and I'm supported by Stuart Stevens as well as ACO on that board, and we look at all of the carbon management programme and all of the projects that we are actually focused on. There is financial benefit. It's a bit like if you invest in energy efficiency within your own home. What we're investing in is heating controls. What we're investing in is insulation. What we're investing in is PV solar panels on the roofs, etc. That's never going to have immediate payback financially. And you'll understand that the payback on those things are usually perhaps longer term. So that's why it's particularly helpful that we seek additional grant funding from Scottish Government, because it would be difficult for us to necessarily justify and say, well, look, we're just going to do this because it's the right thing to do. But equally, we know that we've got a commitment to reducing our carbon emissions by 6%. So those projects are really important, at 6% annually. So those are really important to drive that forward. I guess in terms of financial benefits that we have seen coming through, it's basically how that then relates to our energy consumption. So we at these stations, we've got gas boilers predominantly. So we're by doing some of that energy efficiency, we're reducing our gas consumption, and therefore reducing the cost of our gas, and at least in terms of volume, maybe not in terms of the price of gas, because the prices still manages to go up. So in financial terms, there is benefits there, Leslie. We don't necessarily pull this out as part of the annual procurement report, but that's something that we capture and look at through the Environmental and Carbon Management Board, and we look at all of those carbon management projects to see, well, we said we're going to invest in this, what has it done for carbon, but what has it done for financial? So that's maybe something else that we could perhaps present to the board at a future date around the totality of that. That I think that might be helpful, and it would answer your question better probably. Picking up on, sorry. Picking up on the procurement savings, the procurement savings are specifically around the procurement contracts themselves. So it's not necessarily around the kind of financial savings in terms of utility bills, etc. And the final thing that you mentioned was about immunisation. The immunisation refers to a provision of service that we were looking to include. We already have to immunise our staff for swift water rescue. For Hep A, there was a thought process that we would be immunising for Hep A and Hep B in relation to OCA. But that contract actually is kind of paused at the moment. So although it's on our procurement plan, it's paused at the moment, and we're reviewing when that is needed to be put in place. But that was the context of the immunisation.
That's really helpful to understand that, particularly in that it's not related to COVID, which is where my question was coming to. On just if I briefly on the energy payback, we need to be doing it. I have my perspective was that if we were able to start collating the financial payback and get that out there, it just might to help to encourage the others, if I can put it that way. Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you. So I'm going to bring in Tim, but I'm also aware that Steve and Fiona are also wanting in. Tim.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very quick. John, many congratulations on it. It's a good report. I'm particularly impressed with the 62% SMEs cause close to my heart, and I know how difficult it is to maintain that as we erect more and more. requirements for people to, respond to ITTs, and how difficult it can be for SMEs to get over those hurdles. So well done in maintaining that. I also want to congratulate you on the 82% of your payments being within 10 days. Very good. I just want you to tell me when you're going to close that last 3% off payments within 30 days. But no, all in all, a very good report, and congratulations on those things.
Thank you, Tim. We do target very closely our payment. We make, from our perspective, we pay when we get all the invoicing in, when we get the receipts, and when something is ready for payment and is authorised. So we don't hold back and say, oh well, we can hold on to that for another 25 days and we'll pay within 30 days. That's not our process. Our process is very much to pay almost immediate, and that's our commitment in terms of to the supply chain and in general to the economy. So every year we explore about how can we actually raise that percentage, how can we just eke out a little bit more to make sure that we're paying our suppliers on time, but also helping in terms of their overall cash flow. So we are focused on that, Tim, and we every year I have my conversation in terms of the target setting to say, look, we did well last year, but let's just add a little percent on to see if we can get some improvement. So that's the approach that we take.
Excellent, thank you very much, and great payment into local distribution. So once again, one of these days we will actually do a proper GVA calculation on that, and I think it will be impressive. So well done.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Steve Barron, board member. Morning, everyone. It's a really interesting report. There's lots of good stuff there. And thank you for bringing out the key statistics in your introduction. I know what a difference it can make to be spending locally and to be achieving community benefit through our procurement spend. Indeed, everything in this report says that we're doing a great job of procurement, and I'm really impressed. My question really is about whether or not the format, or how much prescription there is in the format of the report. I found, as a new board member, I found the length and detail that's being provided here in an annual report surprising. There's reports here of individual spends of mere hundreds of pounds, and there's also reports of individual sites where solar panels have been erected. A lot of detail here, and I just wondered about the appropriateness of including everything in here aimed at the audience that we're trying to satisfy. As you said in your introduction, this is a report required by legislation, so I understand that we've got to produce one, but in my view we would achieve more punch, more emphasis with brevity. So my question really is about format and length. Thanks.
Steve, I take your point on board, and I think, as I've said, it is prescriptive. However, the level of detail that we produce, I guess the counterbalance for me is that this report and all this information is then published. And is then becomes a public document, and it helps us in terms of FOIs, it helps us in terms of transparency, giving that information out as part of the kind of overall public content. I think your point is maybe as a reader right now in terms of the annual procurement report, there's a lot of stuff to go through, so maybe what we can do going forward is truncate some of that detail, but still end up with a position that we want to publish as much as possible publicly, because I think that's important from a transparency perspective. Does that answer the question, Steve?
Thank you. I particularly take the point on publication of stuff that might be FOIable in the future, so I do get that. I think there is some scope for making it more concise and more punchy.
I would agree with you, but that's the context we do it in.
Thanks, John. And it's worth reflecting on, I guess, whether there might be a structuring or formatting issue that would allow for appendices in the main report or something similar, so that we can publish it, but in a way that it can be more easily accessed. Of course, some would say that these kind of reports by their nature are rather impenetrable, but anything that we can do to assist. Thank you for your reflections on that. Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question related to the 4.7 million Microsoft spend, John, and it's just as to what extent, if any, do we partner with other organisations, public sector, that also pay loads and loads and loads of money to Microsoft, and do we try and push the agenda in terms of their pricing in partnership with others?
Yeah, I need to be. I'm 99% confident that we do this as a collaborative arrangement already. We talked about 83% of our spend is through collaboration. So, so I'm only hesitating because I just want to be absolutely clear with the board. But my understanding is it's a collaboration already, and therefore it's through a kind of Scottish Government framework. So therefore we are getting the benefits of the wider public sector. But you have to pick what you want from that overall framework. And we picked a fairly wide enterprise solution around all that. So that's why we end up with the prices that we're ending up. But we are getting the benefit of public sector, if you like, behind that, Fiona.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And we'll presume that that was accurate, John, unless you let us know otherwise that we're not missing work for it.
Absolutely. I wouldn't want to mislead the board, so I will check and make sure.
But we will presume it's accurate unless we hear otherwise, and that can be ensure it's properly minuted. Angelina.
Thank you. So thank you very much, John, for an extremely comprehensive report, as others have already noted. I was particularly encouraged at one of the strong messages that jumps off the page, which is that far from seeing procurement as a predominantly transactional piece, the strategic potential of procurement to really drive some of the bigger again goals that we are chasing down is not just acknowledged, but is being absolutely exploited. So fantastic. You can maybe sense a bit of a but coming though, and it's this, which is, so as I was reading the narrative and you're getting enthused by that sense of absolutely this is a big strategic machine with huge potential. Yeah. When I then got to Appendix D, which I read possibly wrongly, and this is where I seek your guidance, John, but I read that as the main set of performance measures that we're tracking. If I'm being honest, I couldn't see a good match between those bigger pieces and what appears to be the structure of our core KPI framework. And there's a number of examples, but the obvious one I think would be our carbon goals. But there's a number that also I was kind of looking for. So, if I'd been reading it in a piece of hard copy, I'd have been kind of flipping the page over, looking for it on the other side, showing my age there where I'm used to paper. But you know what I mean? It was that kind of where is it moment I had. So is it our intention, are we, is this a work in progress? Are we trying to get that better alignment? And if not, I guess I'm just offering you some food for thought there.
Yes. Thank you, Angelina, for that observation. You're absolutely spot on. We have produced a new procurement strategy, and one of the real probably step changes that we've made is one, a greater focus around sustainability, but also we have picked out a much more around the actual performance indicators and how they link back to the strategy itself. And we've also, again, as part of feedback from board members, we had said, oh, well, yeah, we tend to report actual performance, but we don't really do enough around the targets. So again, the procurement strategy and therefore the subsequent annual procurement report will pick up on how it links back to that procurement strategy, and we'll also have targets against it as well. So I know it's not completely there in this report because it refers to the old procurement strategy, but just to give you some assurance that it is coming as part of our push in terms of how we want to take procurement forward, Angelina.
Brilliant, reassuring. Basically, I hear you saying you're well ahead of me, so wonderful. That's good. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
I'm doing the same. I'm pressing the wrong button in the hope that somehow I unmute myself. So we thank you, board members, for those questions, and John for your responses. So we can take from that this is something that actually is in process of change with the new strategy coming in, and alongside that, I guess there's the potential for refreshing of the document so that we're able to be slightly more strategic in some of the summary, perhaps even, so that the real strength of the report is even more evident, because it is an absolutely excellent piece of work. Thank you for that. I think we deserve a very brief break. Can I suggest that we only take a very brief break and we come back at 11:30, please? And with that, we will go into our strategic vision and consultation. So 5 minutes, back at 11:30. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to restart with our long-term strategic vision consultation feedback report, and that's over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Kirsty, and good morning all. Mark McAteer, Director of Strategic Planning, Performance and Communications. And I'm presenting the paper on the kind of feedback on the long-term strategic vision for the service. Before I get into the paper's detail, it's probably just worth noting it's actually a year to this meeting since we brought a paper to the board saying that it was probably the right thing for us to do to begin to develop the long-term vision for the service. The rationale behind that was the scale and the pace of the change pressures that the organisation was facing then, continues to face now, not just in relation to issues such as the COVID pandemic, but the changing nature of risk across communities, public service reform agendas, and so forth. So in that context, we agreed as a board, or you as a board agreed, that the vision was the right thing to develop as a service. And to say it's taken us a year to go through that process, given the extent of consultation and so forth, to bring this to you. In terms of the paper itself, again, I'll be very brief. We launched the consultation process on the draft vision on the 7th of June. We'd taken some external advice from the Consultation Institute on the consultation process, and they advised us that given the nature of the document, it's a very high-level strategic vision, that a 6-week window was sufficient time period for consultation. So we closed the consultation off on the 18th of July. In preparation for the consultation, we conducted a wide-ranging stakeholder stakeholder mapping exercise, so that we knew who our key stakeholders would be in advance, and they were all duly contacted as part of the consultation. Most of the consultation has been on a virtual environment, given where we are with the pandemic, but we've had direct email with all of our stakeholders throughout the exercise, both to make them aware of it and then to encourage responses throughout. And locally, our LSOs, we did some preparatory work with them, and they've been in contact with local stakeholders, partners, and so forth, again, to make them aware of the consultation and to encourage involvement. We produced, and we've detailed it at 3.2 in the paper, a range of materials to help support, from a corporate perspective, the consultation, to ensure there was consistency of messaging, and we had messaging and information available in a variety of formats so that people who were engaging in the exercise were fully aware of the nature of the vision, what it meant, how we intended to use it, and so forth. Overall, as we detail at 3.3 in the paper, we get 261 responses. And I think, as I've said before to board members, that's actually more than I anticipated at the outset. The advice we had from the Consultation Institute was you'll get somewhere in the region of about 200 responses. So to exceed that, I think, is actually positive. In addition to those responses, as I say, our LSOs were also out speaking to local partners, and they conducted around 70 engagement events locally as well. Of those who responded to the survey and gave us some identifying information, about 40% of them were aged between 41 and 55, 56% of them were male. So broadly, again, you can start to see who was responding to the survey, but overall, I think we've got a reasonably balanced survey in terms of the profile of our key stakeholders and key partners across the public sector. And again, we detail out for you how that breaks down across Scotland in terms of those who gave us a postcode, so we can now begin to identify against the service delivery areas, the types of responses that we've got, and we'll pick up on some of that later. In terms of the response itself, we got somewhere in the region of 79%, 78.9% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed the strategic vision was the right vision for the service. So we take that as a very strong, obviously, backing for the vision itself, and gives us the endorsement of those who've responded to the consultation exercise. We also consulted in detail in the document about our strategic intentions. We set out 4 in the document. And again, the range of backing in terms of those who strongly agree or agree ranges from just under 79% backing to 81%. So across the 4 intentions, we get very strong backing. And similarly with our 8 priorities as set out in the document. The strongly agrees range from 75% to just under 85%. So again, as we get into some of the detail of the vision, we're getting, again, very strong backing from our stakeholders. We detail slightly, 3.4, some of the reasons for those who were less happy with the vision. Can I just contextualise that by saying that that level of disagreement is very low overall, so but it still merits some attention from us and from you as a board. What were those reasons for disagreement, and what is it we do in response to some of that, which we'll come on to. The key reasons it seems to sit behind the comments, the more negative comments we got back, were the nature of the document itself. For some people, it lacked detail, but given the nature of it, that's not a surprise. I suppose if we'd went to a detailed consultation document, some people would have come back and saying, why are you consulting in so much detail when you haven't told us what the broad vision is? So we can maybe kind of take it in that light. But again, it's something we will address later on. There was a perception in some of those who were less happy with the vision that it was a cuts agenda, particularly the term agile working was perceived by some as meaning fewer. Not that we would be using our resources in a more flexible way, but we would be deploying fewer resources, be that firefighters, appliances, stations in the future. And there was some concern around the terminology around partnership working. For some, that was taken to mean that we would be plugging the gaps of other public services, and that government should simply fund those public services at the appropriate level. So perhaps maybe what we mean by partnership working wasn't fully understood by some of our partners, that how we all work together around common outcomes to improve life and well-being chances for people across Scotland is something maybe we have to think and clarify around. And there was also some comment around the strategic intention about making our contribution to Scotland wider known. Some people interpreted that as you're just trying to do a PR exercise rather than, as we intended, it's about showing the breadth and depth of the service that we actually offer to communities, because people have got a very narrow conception of what the fire and rescue service may well be. So again, points we'll pick up in a minute. So in addition to those online comments, we got 7 organisations who also wrote to us separately to give us their views. The FBU were one organisation that wrote to us that expressed some concerns around the vision document itself. They broadly agreed with much of it. They liked the strategic intentions, and they agreed with most of the priorities we'd set out. Again, their concerns were around what we meant by the service delivery model being able to respond to changing risk profiles and needs of communities. They had some concerns around agile working, as I said, is it a cuts agenda? And also some concerns around the partnership element that I just talked about. So we can pick up on some of that, obviously, in the questions and answers element of it. We also asked, as part of the consultation, 2 open questions of all respondents. One was at the appropriate vision, and a more general catch-all, is there anything else you would wish to tell us? So they were question 2 and question 5 in the document. And I'd like to just pick out some of the comments that we got back from people in that regard. And again, we'll set out so you can see in terms of, are they positive, negative, or neutral comments. Positive was simply where people give us a positive indication. Negative, where they gave us a negative indication. Anything else, we just classified as neutral, because most of that was observation rather than any particular comment as such. And again, you can see in sections 3.75 and 3.76, how that breaks down across the 3 service delivery areas. Overall, the east of Scotland tended to be more positive and the west a bit more negative. But again, contextualise this, please. It's low numbers that we are talking about, remember. So in terms of the themes, I've set them out at 3.78 in the paper. I'll just pick up some of the themes and give you a bit more flavour of what sits within the consultation document response itself. The comments are indicative at this stage. I didn't want to put too many comments in the paper. is, if you'll remember, we've agreed that all the consultation responses will be published. So we'll take all the identifiers out of them, be they organisations or individuals, but we'll make the responses available, including the written commentary. But again, we'll redact any information from that may well identify individuals involved. But we'll make sure that we're as open and as transparent so that all the comments are available for anyone in due course to look at. And again, we'll make that available to board members. So if we pick out the themes, I say one of the kind of major areas where we got written commentary was around community and partnership engagement. And it was very positive overall. It was very much welcomed by our stakeholders. It was seen as a real strength in the document and a real strength in the organisation. And we get a lot of the comments were saying we look forward to working with you on the detail going forward. So that was a very strong positive set of comments we got. In terms of the content and style of the document, it was a bit more negative, but it was largely around document format. Some people thought it was a bit wordy. Some people thought it was too much by way of management speak in it. And they wanted a more simplified version of the document available so that it was clearer to them what it was we were trying to achieve as an organisation. And others, it was also about, as I say, getting a bit more of the detail. So what will happen, when will it happen, how will it happen type of comment. In terms of operational response, again, there was some negative comment around about that, around what we should be doing as a service is sticking to the core, in inverted commas. We shouldn't be expanding beyond the core services that we offer. Whereas others, in terms of the commentary, as you can see there, well, being a bit more neutral, they were still welcoming, particularly of our commentary in the vision document, around what we would like to do in terms of emergency medical response. As you'll remember from staff engagement as part of the drafting of the vision, we got a lot of strong backing from staff around about what we should be doing around EMR. Some of that has been reflected through in terms of the comments on operational response as well, but in a bit more subtle manner rather than outward strength, a strong support for it. In terms of recruitment, terms and conditions, staffing issue, again, there's some comment in there that's worth thinking about in terms of, will we have sufficient resources to deliver the vision going forward? What are our plans with respect to RVDS colleagues, particularly in terms of securing future recruitment into the service, and also ensuring that we'll get appropriate training and so forth in place. Comments were very reflective of what we heard through the broadening role debates a couple of years ago in the service, came through in that regard. And then lastly, I suppose the biggest other area where we had the written comments was around investment. By and large, it was positive, but there were questions around, will government give you the resources to actually realise the vision? Will you have the resources and the money to deliver against some of that? And again, some concerns around agility. Did that mean in that context that agile was meaning less, fewer, etc., as I said. So they were the kind of broad written themes that came through from it. So I say what we'll do now is reflect on all of those themes, and we will adjust the vision accordingly. It seems to me more about how we clarify some of the terminology that we've used in it, how we amplify some of the themes. So again, around about that, what do we mean by our contribution to Scotland? So I don't see anything in the consultation that says there's a massive rewrite of the vision required. It's a refinement of the vision toward a final publication. And there are some areas that were set out in the paper where we propose to make some of those changes. So some of them will be editing, we'll make it easier to read. We'll strip out some of the management speak, etc. We'll do a proper graphics and design element to the final documentation. So hopefully that makes it, again, more readable for people. We will also set out, because there was some commentary around how does this fit with your strategic plan. So again, we'll make some of that clearer in the final document about how the strategic plan becomes the key delivery plan for the vision going forward, and we'll set out some of the detailed thinking on that. That commitment to communities and partnership working, again, is something we'll tease out a little bit further for people so they know that it's not just words on paper, that's a genuine commitment from the service to continue to work with people as we go to the detailed planning off the back of the vision. There's some work we need to do around, I think, again, clarifying that broader contribution stuff, as I said earlier. So what I'd propose is that we take the document away, subject to any comments today from the board. We work up a re-edited version of this, and we now aim to publish the final version of the document during October. We want to hold it back until after the final closure of the UFAS consultation, because we don't want anyone to think we're trying to influence the UFAS consultation. That closes, I think, on the 11th of October. So from thereafter in October, we'll publish the final version of the plan, plus, as I say, all the supporting findings from the consultation exercise itself. So I would ask of the board that, as well as noting the contents of the report, that you approve those broad changes that I've indicated, and that you perhaps nominate a board member that I can work alongside as we make those changes, and they can then give the board the assurance that the changes have been duly made before we head to final publication in October. Once we've published the document, I'll just briefly touch on our next steps. We will go into a detailed planning exercise as we move towards delivery. We'll look to capture some early wins that we can then publicise over the next year in relation to that. But the strategic plan for 22-25 will become our first major delivery plan. And we've already got meetings set up, as we were talking about earlier on, with regards to the change element and all of this between ourselves and the Service Development Directorate about how this will then translate using the change cycle into a change plan, as well as business as usual elements. So detailed planning will follow once we've got final approval from yourselves, and then publication of the vision itself. I'll come back to in due course to our board strategy day, and then bring a paper to the board setting out that detailed planning process later. So with that, Kirsty, happy to take any comments, questions from board members.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to bring in board members in just a second. So I'm just clarifying my understanding, Mark. So what we've got the opportunity to do today is board to ask questions and scrutinise, and then we're being asked to approve the process to take this forward. Can I check, as part of that process, is this going to come back to the board again before final publication?
Well, I'll be guided by yourselves. If we do that, that'll then delay the publication, because obviously the next board meeting is in October. So we need to bring it to the end of the board meeting, so that might mean a slight delay, and we're then running up against, as you remember, the national framework, which we still believe is going to be published in December. So happy to bring it back to the next board, or say work with a whole group of board members to get it through to that final stage.
It really was a question rather than a recommendation that we should. I don't think we should be delaying. I'm also not sure that just having one board member looking at it to give assurance to the rest of the board is what we want to do either. I think probably a brief report coming back to the strategy today, perhaps with the circulation of the report, would be more than would be required. I think, subject to board members disagreeing, and I am going to bring you in, it sounds to me like the consultation actually has got very broad support with a few specific areas needing to be addressed, and we would need some assurance around how those were being addressed. But as you say, I don't think it is a rewrite we're talking about. So a bit of an update at strategy today and circulation of the paper, to me, feels about the right kind of thing. But I'll make sure that board members have the opportunity to comment on that before we make that our final decision. So with that, I'm going to bring in...
Sorry, Kirsty, what I'll just do then to do that, what I'll do is I'll capture as part of it a change document as well that will sit beside that, so you can see what was the original text and what's replaced it, as well as seeing the full document. So no problem.
That's very handy. I'm a huge fan of tracking changes so that I don't need to reread things again if unavoidable. Nick, would you like to come in first, please?
Right, good. Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair. Gosh, such a lot happened in that last 2 minutes there. So yes, I agree with the process that you've just outlined. I think that's the first thing. Second thing is, before I get on to the actual report, a lot of our views will be very subjective, and therefore there could be quite a bit of disagreement and quite a few variations on those. So Mark or Chair, would you like us to email you if we've got particular detailed comments, Mark, around that report, rather than go into all the details just now in a board meeting? We can do that, no problem. Okay, nods there, fine, okay. So moving on to the report for a second, the great piece of work. Really, I was I challenged myself when I was reading it a little bit. I think we probably all want to see an agreement, or strongly in agreement with what was suggested, but actually not having that and having that alternative view and other people's comments is really is really worthwhile, and it's valuable insight into the way other people look at our work. One particular point I just want to mention is the use of management speak. And I think all of us are probably guilty in some way or another of using words which we feel are, it's definitely not management speak. We probably have that higher level of management speak. We roll our eyes ourselves and think, gosh, isn't that management speak? But an awful lot of other people will also listen to the language that we use and class that as management speak. And I just would encourage any rewrite to really comprehensively go through a number of times and a number of iterations and just really use that simple language, because the communication of this long-term vision is going to be absolutely essential to its success. So the first, that's one worth. So in other words, a simple language version, which would require a reasonable amount of work, but I think would be useful. There's only one other point I'll make before I then go and email you, Mark, but is the long-term vision the right vision for you graphic? Just bear with me as I scroll up page. I had to read it quite a few times, and I was just a bit confused with the expression at the top of not known. You're referring to the location of not known, but actually the question is, what is this the right vision for you? And the words not known next to me could mean I don't know. And I'm not sure actually if the location of the if the respondent's location is that important with knowing the long-term vision, particularly when in the box below that you actually amplify that in words. So that would be just one major comment I wanted to make, but that was it. Otherwise than that, Mark, an enviable task to have to get through all that data and try and present it in a way which is pleasing to all. But that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On your latter point, I think you're absolutely right. We'll clarify that the not knowing is a reference to the postcode rather than we don't have an opinion on the particular question. So we'll get that clarified for the final version of this paper and make sure when we publish, we've also got that picked up and clarified as well, Nick. Your general point around language, I think you're absolutely right. We all slip into it. We don't realise it. We all know what certain terms mean when we use them, and we forget that not all of our audiences do. So we will go through it thoroughly and try and strip out as much of that professional language, and I'll put that in inverted commas, as we possibly can, and get it as simple English as we can probably make the final version. But there will be still some time where we have to use some of that language, but we will try and simplify it as much as we can.
Yeah, and just to add to that, where we feel that we need to use professional language, even just an explanation of what we need, I think we all think something very particular about the term agile working and what that means, but if that's not fully understood or if it could be misinterpreted, then we need to be really clear about that. Leslie.
Great, thanks, Kirsty. Just in passing, because we're talking about location, I'm not sure that the differences between East, North and West are significant enough to merit them being the way in which we present the results. I know that presenting them by member of the public, member of SFRS, fire service staff, local authority, there are difficulties with that, particularly in distinguishing between members of the public and members of staff who perhaps haven't declared themselves as members of staff. So, but I'm not sure presenting it by East, North, West is actually helpful in the analysis. Okay, my substantive point. I think this has been an absolutely superb consultation. And I think the work of all involved, Marisha and her team, and others involved across the service, LSOs and countless others, I think it's been very good, and congratulations and really well done in that. I'm aware that this is the first consultation of a series that we will be doing, and I know that as a board we are very, very keen to be as good as we humanly can be, to be exemplary in the quality of our consultation and our engagement. With that context, my comment is about the feedback report. I note and welcome that all the responses will be publicly available, but in the feedback to respondents, I feel that my question is whether we are giving them enough back. So if I'm a respondent that said, I'm concerned about what you mean by agility, at the moment in the report back, it simply says, 30%, commented negatively on operational response or whatever. As a respondent, I would really like to see, I was concerned about agility. So something about some narrative along the lines of a number of respondents raised concerns about what we meant by agility. Here is what we mean by agility. Here is how we are going to reflect those concerns when we rewrite the document. Yeah, the other second example, Mark, you mentioned concerns raised about will we have sufficient resources to deliver. So a number of respondents raised concerns about resources to deliver. Here is our thinking on that, and here's how we've altered the text. And I think that would feel to me to be better way of responding to concerns raised. I don't know whether you're planning that in some part of the process, but I didn't see it in the report back here. And the report back here felt to me to be more process focused rather than content, substantive content focused. But again, all of those points within a context of, I think that we've done the engagement really well, and that I'd like to get this one as good as we can do so that our following consultations are conducted to the same or higher level. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Leslie. I'll start with the one on the information broken down by service delivery area. That really goes back to our last major consultation on transformation, where we didn't have sufficient feel from the information we got back from that exercise on geographical variations in some of the questions that we'd asked. So we deliberately this time built in a question that allowed us to have a look at that, just to see, was there any variation across the country in terms of what's come back. Now, broadly, as we can see, when you're getting 79% response, the answer is no. It was to give you that assurance as a board that we went to that level of detail just to pick up on any nuances that may well exist. So that's why it's in there. I think your point about how we summarise some of this is very useful. When we come to the final version, we will publish a summary analysis report, and I'll pick up in that analysis report some of your points about when people said agility, this is what they were saying, here's what we've taken from that. So we will pick that up in that analysis piece. It'll get published alongside the final vision itself. So I think it's a very good suggestion. And I was assuming here with this report that it's a very high-level summary report to the board. We've all been living with this for a year. We know some of the detail, but I'll make that a note of that, and we'll make sure we get that right for that final version that goes out alongside the final vision itself.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mark.
Valerie?
Yeah, Mark, I agree with everything that's already been said, particularly about the north, east, west situation. I think actually operationally it absolutely makes sense, and I'm sure that you've done that. Thank you for doing that. I'm not sure that it helps in terms of it feels as though it could potentially pitch aspects of the country against each other, and it also creates that continuing division. So I just emphasise Leslie's point around that. But if I'm honest with you, I think the report is grand. I did have to reread a few bits of it a couple of times because I agree with Nick's point about not knowing being the top one. It took a wee while for it to sink in, Mark. That's more me than it is you. But I suppose there's just a couple of things that kind of come out of it, and some of it I've already touched on previously. I can obviously see from some of the comments that are included within the report that we have had responses from local authorities, so that's assuring. But what I guess I'm just reflecting a little bit back to you about, and I don't think there's very much we can do about it, but in a strategic vision that talks about economic growth, it talks about the environment, it talks about preventative work specifically as it relates to health and well-being, and in the context that we have statutory responsibilities for corporate parenting, for carbon reduction, for justice, I am really disappointed to see the lack of organisational response from groups that relate to that, whether that is Nature Scot or COSLA or Community Justice Scotland, or, without wishing to embarrass anybody else on the call, Public Health Scotland. You know, there's a lot of organisations that I would have expected to respond to. And I guess from my perspective, I'm assured that the job that has been done around the consultation is as thorough and as full as it could have been, Mark, in the context and timescales that we're working to. So there's no criticism in there. But it does raise a question for me in terms of assurance around our engagement at a national level. I am 100% assured that our LSOs and their teams are doing a phenomenal job in engagement at a local level. I am not as assured that that is replicated at the national level and engagement around those relationships. And it goes back actually to the point that you made, which I thought was actually reassuring, was it was about how people understand the work of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and is it too narrow in terms of their understanding? And it feels as though the national organisational response to our consultation is possibly demonstrating that actually that's still understood in far too narrow a context that is useful for us going forward. So I'm not really looking for massive, because I think it's more of a longer term awareness and engagement issue, and I'm just about assurance from my own point. So I'm not looking for a massive response to that. I do have a couple of other sort of smaller points, but very particular going back, and I apologise to the chair, but I actually slightly disagree. I think it does need to come back to the board, and my reasons for that are, this is a long-term strategic vision, which is fundamentally our responsibility. On a governance issue, I think it's important that people know that the board have seen the final draft and that we have publicly approved the final draft. That doesn't mean that I have any disagreements with any of the things that you said, Mark. I absolutely agree that those changes are all in line with where we're going. We don't need to make massive changes based on the consultation. I think this is a point of governance and an appropriate process. And so I do think it has to come back to the board. But I appreciate that if that's not how we will take it, then that's fine. But I just want to point that out. And my final thing was just to say that I know we've been delayed with this with the COVID, but I can't remember the name of them, sorry Mark, but the advisory groups that Marisha talked about, the reference groups that we talked about, getting people from specific backgrounds and lived experiences to be able to run things past. I think this is an example where it would have been such a huge strength to have had that in place to take the vision through those groups in addition to the consultation. And it just, I guess, it's when we're able to get an update and when that might come in. But overall, yeah, just want to say thank you for the work.
Thank you, Mary. I'll start with your last point.
Sorry, before you come in, Mark, obviously there was a point of process around potentially how we manage this. So I think we might do that now separately before we come on to Barry's more substantive points. As always, Barry, very happy to be disagreed with and for alternative perspectives to be put forward. I actually agree. I think that this is something that's very significant and important to the board. So we do need to make sure we've got sufficient oversight of it. I wonder whether a compromise, I'm saying this now so that other board members have got an opportunity to express views on it, but I'm thinking that perhaps the best option, given that we don't want to delay it, is to have a small one-item special board meeting at the beginning of the next strategy day, and that would allow proper scrutiny, oversight, consideration and decision-making around this without having to delay it any further. So I will table that, get board views on it, and then we'll make the decision at the end. So thank you for raising that. Mark.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Your latter point about the kind of the engagement process that we'd previously spoken about, we've commenced recruitment for the PICT team that will sit with Paul's directorate, so that's underway. And the engagement framework, which will tease out some of the detail of some of that comes to Good Governance Board next week in its first draft format, so it'll be coming to the board in due course as well, Mary. So we're well underway with the process design elements. We're bringing in staff. We'll then take that forward, put it into reality for us. And your other point about our engagement with national partners, again, I will say that in the context of COVID, we have not had as much engagement as we would normally have with a lot of our strategic partners. But it is something that we work hard at, and whether they respond to something, I can't control that element, but I can assure you we have made every effort to get as many of them as engaged in this process as possible. But it's not a normal period that we're trying to consult on at the moment. That's the only caveat that I'll introduce at that point.
Thanks, Mark. Tim?
Thank you, Kirsty. Just to begin with, I would concur with your proposal as to how to carry this forward with an item at the next strategy day, so that you have my support in that. As an arch exponent of management speak, I think it's very well, the point's well made in the report that these things can be quite impenetrable. And I personally find that having objective editorial input to things that I write tremendously helpful. And I wonder if perhaps we're all a bit close to this. Is there merit, and I'm not asking you to answer this directly, I'm just throwing it out there as a sort of rhetorical, is there merit in us maybe looking at external editorial support and maybe looking at something like the crystal mark and those kind of plain English things, just to make sure that we are writing things as plainly as possible. I support pretty much everything Mari said, except for the fact that I'm less concerned about institutional responses, and I simply don't buy the COVID-19 excuse that everybody's not responding because of COVID-19. I'm much more interested in citizen responses. So I think you've achieved a good deal in this, but I think Mari's general point that we actually have good engagement through our LSOs to citizen engagement, we perhaps somehow do miss joining that up as effectively as we could in the consultation process. Thank you.
I'll have a think about the external support element. I think your general point, though, Tim, around the crystal mark is something we're actually working towards. We try and use plain English in all our publications, but it's something we've spoken about in terms of should we go for that accreditation or not, and that in itself will then bring new changes into how we write and publish documents. So it's certainly something I'll give some consideration. Your point, I suppose, your observation about are we all too close to this, I think that is part of the challenge at times. That, you know, we've all done it. You write a document, you think you know what you've said, then someone reads it and goes, "That those words don't say what you've just told me you thought you'd said." So it's a general problem I think we all face. But we'll keep working away at it for that final version through to the end of September.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you. I mean, just picking up on the comments about the institutional response, I mean, I think it is disappointing, but I think it's also needs to be looked at not just in the context of the response to this consultation, but how these institutions relate to us more generally than that, and whether, and I wonder, and I'm not looking for a response, but whether this is just symptomatic of a more deep-rooted and fundamental issue. I think in terms of how you present the data, you need to cut it somewhere. I think the northeast west divide is important, because it's important that we're able to demonstrate that we've reached out to and received comment from all quarters of the country. So I think that is important. I think the thing that is quite striking to me is that in many of the graphics, North comes out as being the most negative in their response, and it creates, well, a question in my mind about how we respond to that, because while taken together, you know, we can broadly say, yeah, there's support, but is there evidence here to say that from that part of the country there is less support and we need to do something about responding specifically to it?
I don't think in general there is a problem in that sense in the North, Brian. What you've got in terms of those two graphics are just the written comments. If we then take the 79% of people who have given us their strong backing to the vision, and we do the same analysis, I think you'll see the North clearly would, at that level of positivity, will still come out as broadly in support of us. But I think your general point in there about there seems to be a theme in the North around negativity, but small numbers, so I wouldn't over generalise from a very small number, but it's certainly something that when we do the debrief, that's something that's not actually in response to Leslie. Off the back of this exercise and also the UFAS exercise, we'll do a debrief on our consultation and engagement process and take any lessons out of that. But as we go through that, Brian, I'll certainly make sure we pick up your point and see if there are any themes coming through from the ALSOs in particular around their areas, and is there any negativity, etc., that's not maybe been fully captured in the analysis. So we'll keep an ear out for it, but I don't think generally from what I hear and what I hear from the LSOs we've got any particular problems in any areas of the country.
If I may just come back, Kirsty, I think that's hugely encouraging. I'm just saying, you know, from a simple accountant's perspective, looking at the drawings on the page, it leaves me with a doubt. So, and I suspect there are maybe one or two more simple accountants out there.
Thank you, Brian. Paul.
Paul Stannard, new board member. I think the consultation was clearly a success, and I think that's the first thing to remember. And I think the consultation was broadly what we might have hoped it would be. I think in some of this discussion now about the consultation report, we risk going into the next stage. And I think the consultation report should simply be a report of the consultation. And I think it's almost a little bit dangerous to say in the consultation report, oh, they misunderstood us, and to sort of try and correct their thinking. I think that's a sort of next stage on. I'd rather see this as a consultation report which just was that. And the question, therefore, is what are we going to do with the consultation report once we've got it published? Because it's quite clear that the consultation report as a summary is a good thing for us. And we should therefore be thinking about how we use that and take it forward and how we discuss it with people. So perhaps the public organisations which didn't contribute, or the local authorities, perhaps there's an engagement there with the consultation report saying, this is what others have said, does it match with your views? And that's not an attempt to go to the next stage and go into the detail, but just saying, this is where we've gone so far. So I would actually be quite keen to get the consultation report out ASAP, and then hear a little bit more about your plans for what you're going to do with the consultation report in the next 3 months.
Thank you, Paul. I suppose what we'll do from a communications perspective is we'll reflect again on what's been said in the report. So how we use language, for example, is something that we'll pick up and adjust accordingly. So when we're putting out external communications, or indeed internal communications, some of the points that have come back around some of the terminology, we'll reflect on that. So we will learn and make sure we adjust our language. In terms of the broader consultation, we have a political engagement strategy that's been agreed by the service. And again, not making excuses here, but COVID kind of put the spanner in the works for delivery against that. So we're now looking again at SLT colleagues and Kirsty and Martin as the strategic leaders of the organisation, going out, meeting with our key partners, now whether that be face-to-face or online, so we can have those types of discussions with them, and we will use exactly the lines that you're saying. This is what we've heard from others. Does this still square with your views of where we need to go with the service? So that level of engagement from the national to our strategic national partners and our local partners is something we've already got the plans in play for. So from September onwards, we should hopefully be back out in the field either virtually or physically having those discussions with our partners, Paul. So that's very much part of the next stage of where we go with this, because having a plan is one thing. We need to make sure that our partners, including communities, understand the plans as well. So there's more engagement that's required off the back of the vision once it's published. The publication is just the beginning of the process as far as I'm concerned. So there's a short-term element of that. And as we go through the next stages in terms of the strategic planning process, that also brings with it a degree of engagement that we will go through both with our partners and with our communities. So there'll be a full detailed plan will come to you about the strategic planning process over the next couple of months as well.
If I can just come back, Kirsty, on that. I accept there will be a plan coming back about strategic engagement late at the end of this year or beginning of next year. I'm thinking about a sort of hit list of those that we didn't get to respond to the initial, and a list of organisations and perhaps even individuals. I think you, for instance, you only had one MSP contribute, which is unsurprising, but it's then about alerting other MSPs and having it on their radar so they feel that they're aware that we've started this process and that they're not being blindsided later when it gets into something to do with their constituency. So I would hope that in the next short term, before the strategic, you actually have a hit list for those sorts of things.
Again, for our engagement strategy, we did have a hit list in terms of both organisations. We also looked at MSPs and MPs, those who'd expressed either an interest in the service, commented in Parliament on the service, put out tweets in the service and so forth. And we had a hit list drawn up, and who are the ones we now have to go and engage with. So in light of this consultation, we'll certainly refresh that. And again, that will be part of the plan. So we will start with the ones we think we need to get to quickest and most urgently, and work our way through the remainder as well. So it's definitely part of the thinking, Paul.
Leslie?
Thanks. Just to confirm that I support the having a board meeting, single item board meeting pegged onto the strategy day to consider this. In considering that item, I just want to just note that I think it will be really important that we have the report saying the nature of the negative comments were A, B, C and D, and here's how we've handled them. I know on occasion sometimes we get, this report will be finalised. I think it will be required for us to be able to approve the final version of the long-term vision, to have had that report ahead of time so that we can consider it. So that was the only point, Kirsty. Thank you. Sorry, to have the report dealing with how the concerns have been, how we've addressed the concerns. Thanks.
I had taken from Mark's earlier comment that that was already agreed, and I can see Mark nodding that absolutely, and it kind of fits with some of what Paul has said also. This isn't just about getting to the end result of having a revised long-term vision. It's about the process between now and how we get to that it's important to iterate and be really transparent around. And I mean, the consultation is now closed on the vision. So to the extent some of those have missed their chance to shape the long-term plan that will be coming to us shortly, but that does not mean that we're in any way not obliged to be sharing that long-term vision and to be getting ongoing iterative feedback on our direction of travel, because that is going to be key to how we operationalise this. This is very high level. The nuance is going to come out in the future plans rather than in the vision document. So this is the beginning, absolutely not the end. Does that fit with other board members' expectations and thoughts also? Okay. On that basis, are we, sorry, Mark, would you like to say anything else before we come to formal process?
I'm done, Kirsty, thank you.
Brilliant. So on that basis, are we content to approve the future direct? We've noted the report and we're approving the process going forward, and this will come back to the board formally at a special board meeting in advance of a strategy day, so that we've got the proper time to give this very important document the care and consideration it deserves. Good. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. We have spent quite a lot of time on that, and that's been important. I will just remind us, as a board, we do still have quite a substantial agenda to get through. We're about to move into our resource and capital monitoring budget. Can I ask board members to prioritise their questions in this so that we make sure that we can give the whole agenda due attention? John, resource monitoring budget.
Thank you, Kirsty. And just to confirm the position around the Microsoft Office contract, first of all, I can confirm now 100% that it was through Crown Commercial Services, and therefore had the whole of the UK public sector behind it. So hopefully that confirms the position. Moving on then to the resource budget monitoring, I present the resource budget monitoring position for the 4 months to the end of July 2021, and seek approval from the board. In the 4 months, our overall position is a slight overspend against budget of £32,000, and the forecasted year-end position at this stage shows an underspend of 0.145 million, which is 0.1% of our overall budget. Just a few things to highlight. At 3.3, we'd highlight that the costs incurred of about 0.411 in relation to COP26, ESMCP and Test and Protect are not included in our forecast, on the basis that we are seeking separate funding for those items. In addition, as board members will know, I have included additional visibility around the kind of environments, and there was 2 environments in the period, so just to highlight it now, not hugely substantial, but they're there, which was that there was a transfer from travel to subsistence in one of the health and safety business cases, and also we drew down from contingency 29,000 for the fatal accident inquiry at Cameron House, which was something that we hadn't obviously budgeted for previously. There will be more around the FAI for Cameron House in terms of costs, but we'll draw that down when we need to. So moving on, the actual resource budget monitoring report, board members may see that it's a slightly new and different style of report in terms of the summary page, and that was something that I was discussing with SLT in particular around trying to improve and look at our overall financial reporting. We trialled it last month at SLT and a new format that hopefully board members find a bit more visual and summarises the overview of the kind of in-year financial position, plus also giving you a little bit more focus around some of the financial risks to our forecast. This summary report has also it's been produced at Appendix A and also supported in terms of the detailed variance report at Appendix B. Moving on to then the main variances, as you'll see in terms of that overall report, the forecast is for a whole time cost to be overspent by 1.237 million, and that's driven by both the pay offer, which I mentioned last time round, which is 0.5% above the budget, and an increase in our overtime, offset in part by our recruitment profile and how we're trying to bring recruits in. It's slightly behind budget. In addition, at 4.2, our support costs have been driven by that recruitment through those business cases, and we've seen a small decrease in our overspend predicted. We have underspends in terms of control and also a fairly sizable underspend on the retained side, and that's driven by both the activity levels and general retained staffing. In addition, we're still seeing elements around travel and subsistence. COVID is still with us, so there's still restrictions there. So we're starting to see some additional underspends coming through in those lines. And then finally, in terms of property, we have seen some additional, some underspend reported previously around Thornton in terms of the kind of rates and utilities. And in general, I just wanted to highlight that we are seeing the continued impacts of COVID-19 and coming through our actual position, but we are managing that and forecasting that as best we can throughout the period. So the only other thing I wanted to highlight was the kind of financial risks, but and just because of time, I shall pause there and take questions from board members.
Thanks, John. And I certainly found the new presentation interesting and useful. So that would be my view, and I would welcome other board members' views. I can see a lot of nodding. So thank you. Your different approach to this is welcome. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. Just two observations and one question, John. I mean, like as Kirsty has said, I welcome the additional information in the presentation of that, although I suspect SLT members' eyesight must be better than mine because I kind of struggled. I struggle with the one on a page type thing. So maybe looking ahead, you might think how you can assist me and others in my situation. So, but I welcome the attempt to improve upon that. I really like the inclusion of risks. My observation would be, might it be possible to say a little bit about the effectiveness of the mitigation of these risks, rather than just telling us that there is a risk, you know, without making it overly burdensome. So they were the observations. I mean, every time I look at these reports, overtime is the thing that, you know, my eyes alight to. And I know it's tricky, but is there a fundamental issue here that we're not able to tackle either in relation to the budget setting process or the management of that budget, or perhaps both these things as well? You know, is there now a point where we say, you know, we will monitor this, we will do this, we'll do that? Are we at the point where we need to say, well, look, that's not working, we need to do something else?
Okay, in response to that question, we are making sure that we review constantly where we are in terms of overtime. In particular, that's done through central staffing, so particularly around the kind of obviously the whole time area. And that's very much driven to say, well, actually, do we need overtime? And I suppose it's to understand what are the drivers around that overtime, and it's to understand that actually, you know, we have an overall target operating model. We know that we have a position where we have a buffer around that. We try to get a 96% availability overall. We will always, I fear, have challenges around skills, and we have a position where we're bringing recruits in, so sometimes we need to make sure that we have the right skills in the right place. So therefore there is no alternative rather than other than overtime to actually make that happen. I think what I'm saying to you is that it is scrutinised through a overtime action group. They make sure that we fully understand what are the drivers of that overtime actually are. We plan it in terms of the budget based on what we know at the time and our experience in previous years, and what we know of where we are in terms of target operating model, what we know in terms of retirals, what we know in terms of recruits. So we make the best view as to what the overtime picture looks like. I think what we're seeing is that there is very much more overtime being incurred, and that's really driven by that operational availability and that need for that operational availability. That's about as much as I could probably say on it, Brian. Others might operationally tell you more, but that's the kind of financial view of it.
No, thanks, John. And to be honest, I mean, you've said exactly what I thought you would say, and it leaves the question in my mind: are we simply consistently being unrealistic and understating the budget on overtime?
I think we've actually done not too badly in previous years in predicting the overtime. I think we've just got some real challenges in overtime this year, and particularly because of some of the restrictions we have around COVID, which means we can't detach people from stations, etc. So therefore we're having to try and resource it in alternative ways. So there's particular features, if you like, for this year, but I wouldn't go as far to say that we're not good at the kind of forecasting of overtime.
No, sorry, and I wasn't really implying that, but thank you very much for your answer.
Thanks, John and Brian. Stuart. Sorry, Steve. I had SB. It's Stuart. No,
it's
Steve.
going to be confusing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unfortunately every time I move my mouse on my screen to attend to who's to speak next, it goes blank. So yes, it's Steve that I've got listed next. Apologies.
Thank you. Good report, thank you, and an assuring position being reported here. My question is about the board's role. We're being asked to approve a budget position. Could I suggest that our role is actually to scrutinise the budget position and to note it rather than to approve it?
My understanding is that you're scrutinising and you're approving, but I will happy to be stand corrected.
It's a good point, because we are scrutinising, and we're not actually approving the budget position, I guess. In fact, we're not approving anything. We're receiving, scrutinising and noting the report. And that's the case actually with both the resource and the capital monitoring one, because there isn't a decision to be made as such. So that's a good point. So we will, I don't know whether we usually say approve or not. But yes, let's move that to note and scrutinise, I think, unless there's another good reason. I'm just going to bring in Ali briefly. Sorry, Ali, to kind of launch in the middle of the meeting if you're busy writing things. But does that make sense to you also?
Thanks, Stu. Just in terms of the scheme of delegations as well, it's just for the board authorises the chief officer to maintain and administer financial resources, operation of bank accounts, receipts, and everything like that, and that's sub-delegated to the acting director of finance. So it's obviously ultimately the board's responsibility to make sure that these are managed appropriately. So just on that basis, as long as you're content that through that scrutiny aspect that you're overseeing that and it's been fully captured, then that should not be a problem. But we'll make sure that we do check that. Steve, I think you want to come back in.
Yeah, Steve, come back in again.
I think the risk of approving is that we make it difficult for ourselves to hold the officers accountable in the future, because our job surely is to approve the budget once a year and then leave the executive to manage it.
No, absolutely. There is no decision here. What we're doing is we're doing due diligence and oversight of the budget. So let's find a better phraseology around both the resource and the capital monitoring budget going forward. And if we need to find a new word other than scrutinise, note and approve, we will do that. Good point. On that basis, are we now content on this occasion to note our oversight of the resource budget monitoring report and move into the capital monitoring report? Brilliant. Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. Still with you, John.
Okay, Kirsty, thank you. So present to the board the capital monitoring report for the 4 months to the end of July for scrutiny and noting. At 2.5, there has been a further revision. I'll probably just highlight to you that there's been further revision around the net zero grants. This gets into tricky accounting things. So just to highlight, the grant in relation to vehicle leases has been removed from the kind of capital position as part of our current accounting practice that we confirm with our external auditors, Deloitte, requires that it's shown as deferred income and not as capital. So there's no impact on the actual funding available, but if you were eagle-eyed, you would note that we've taken out some of the kind of capital element within the overall programme. The revised capital budget is therefore 33.980 for the period 21-22. Just to note also that the accounting will change under IFRS 16, which will be applied in public sector in 22-23, which means we will revert back to actually it is on the balance sheet and covered by capital. So we're just having to comply with the current accounting standards, but it will change going forward. The overall capital committed or paid to date is 23.631 million, which is 69, just over 69% of the overall budget, which we think is good progress. The detail of progress is noted at 3.4 and 3.5. As noted within there, the Port Lesson project is now complete, and also at SLT we approved the acceleration of powered rescue equipment. One of the things that Martin was talking about was the deliverability of the capital programme was a challenge for us this year, and one of the areas that we are looking to do, or what we're looking to do, is accelerate where we can, so bring forward areas, and one of those areas is powered rescue equipment, which we know is a vital component for moving forward for the service, so we are accelerating that with our suppliers. I won't go through the risks because Martin's already highlighted that earlier on. And the only other thing that I wanted to say, which is not on the report that only came in as news earlier on this week, is that we have received a completion of additional funding applications for the Green Public Decarbonisation Scheme from Scottish Government. So we applied for 4 funds and we were successful, and that totals £2.1 million in additional capital funding for us, which we are going to allocate to environmental projects across our stations. So that is the overall capital position, and I open it up for additional questions.
Yeah, and can I just say that's fab news, John, that we've managed to secure further funding for environmental causes from external organisations, and credit to your team, the diligence around searching out, applying for and securing funding, additional funding on top of our Scottish Government grant allocation really is commendable. So thank you for that. Any additional comments or questions for Joan or others on the capital monitoring report? So we have had a couple of issues already flagged earlier in the meeting around risk for this. Or are we content to note this? Content. Thank you very much. That's excellent. That takes us to our combined risk and performance report, and it's over to Mark for that. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kirsty. Just a quick overview of the report, and just worth reminding ourselves that it is the first quarter of the year we're reporting, so there's nothing much significant in terms of detail at this stage, but throughout the year, as the new board members will see, we'll start to dig into some of the detail that sits behind the information in the report as some trends become more apparent throughout the year. In terms of risk, Brian noted earlier on that there's some ongoing discussions about our approach to risk management in the service and how we report that through to the RAC and the board. And again, just to say that as that matures, we'll start to see that reflected in how we report risk in this report as well. This is a high-level summary of that for the board. The detail is through RAC, but you'll see some changes next year as we progress with that particular agenda, and it's just there for board information. In terms of the annual operating plan elements within the paper, there are 20 actions that are going ahead as planned. They are in green status. 7 actions are sitting at amber status, but there's nothing been indicated yet to my team that there's a problem with any of those actions, so we would expect them to be back on track throughout the year. Clearly, if that changes, that will be updated to the board. We've also continued to note for the board the residual actions from the annual operating plans 2020-21 and also 19-20, and as previously agreed with the board, we'll retain those actions in the plan, sorry, in the report for you until each of those actions are fully realised on behalf of the service. Of the 15 indicators that we report to the board, 6 are sitting at green, so they're on target. 2 are within 10% of their target, where we have targets, that is, and therefore are sitting at amber, and 7 we don't have a particular target attached to them. They're monitored, scrutinised by management, so we can maybe pick up on some of that. Just to look at some of those targets and PIs, just to give you a bit more information. In terms of home fire safety visits, we are back on target with our home fire safety visit programme. Board members will remember that throughout last year with COVID, we had to step back from it. We launched the Make the Call campaign and so forth, and then we had to prioritise people in the kind of more need, the high risk categories, as we began to switch home fire safety visits back on last year. As COVID restrictions ease, we hopefully will begin to see that pattern of back on target re-establish itself. And there is also a recovery plan that's been put in place within P&P about how we deal with some of the backlog issues as well. And the LSOs are beginning to work through the detail and all of that for us. In terms of accidental dwelling fires, again, it's worth noting in comparison to last year, we're now back below the average trend that we see for that. So that's a good thing for the service. And that translates itself down into some other key indicators. High severity fires, we saw a slight upward movement last year. Some of you will remember that's now back to its kind of average 3-year trajectory, slightly off target at the moment in terms of being an amber, but it's back along roughly where we would expect it to be. So again, a good movement for the service. In terms of UFAS, we're below target, slightly below, but as we begin to see things opening up across the economy, we may begin to see some movement in UFAS, but again, the UFAS consultation process is out at the moment, but it's something we'll monitor right through to obviously any changes that are going to take place more long-term for UFAS. And then lastly for me, in terms of fatalities, again, board members will remember this time last year, we were reporting a significant spike in fatalities in Q1. We're back to broadly the kind of long-term trajectory in terms of fatalities. But again, there's some further information coming through from the fire investigation reports that's not yet available to us. But what we're seeing within those fatalities, it's the general pattern of individuals that are involved. This quarter, it was all male, the average age between 40 and 70, where smoking, cooking, alcohol, or drug use was reported as part of the IRS report. See further details, and some of that will come from the fire investigation reports. and we can maybe pick up on that in due course. But it just continues to make the importance of the Make the Call campaign be maintained in the service. I think that we keep that going while we make that transition back into full home fire safety visit again going forward. But with that, Kirsty, I'm happy to take any comments or questions from board members.
Okay, thank you. So there were a quick flurry of hands, but I'll take Leslie first.
Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, Mark. Mark, I note your comments about those actions rated amber, and I think you said that you have no concerns about you are saying that they will be back on track, so that is good to know. I have a question about one rated red, and that is design and implement revised fire investigation delivery model. So there was a 3-year slippage on this design and implementation of the model, and I just wonder, can you remind us as to why that was subject to a substantial slippage and what the consequences of that slippage were, and whether there may be lessons for the future in that? I do note that it's the design is complete and implementation is pending, so I guess we're seeing our way through that now. So why did it happen, and consequences and any lessons? Thank you.
Tempted though I am to answer, Leslie. I'd probably better call in Stuart Stevens to maybe answer that one on my own behalf.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Leslie. Good afternoon now, colleagues. Stuart Stevens, Director of Service Delivery. Yeah, Leslie, the work started to reform the fire investigation structure in 2017, and that was following the off-station structure review that was carried out in 2017, which resulted in a reduction in the number of fire investigation posts. A proposal was put to SLT in 2018 to enact that restructuring. However, it wasn't supported at that stage, and further work was subsequently required. You'll be aware that this obviously coincided with a number of significant challenges across the sector and the operating environment that we currently work within, and primarily that's Cameron House, Glasgow School of Art, and indeed obviously the Grenfell incident, which has had a huge impact on both fire investigation and the wider prevention and protection arena. So we took this opportunity to carry out a broader review of fire investigation to modernise it beyond just that operationally based demand model to more how it's going to support our strategic intentions going forward in terms of prevention and protection. What I mean by that is how we would work more closely with academia, with building standards, how we would achieve ISO accreditation to better support the criminal justice system going forward, how we would train and upskill our frontline crews in terms of fire investigation, and also how it would inform obviously our overall prevention and protection strategy going forward, both in terms of the built environment, but also within the domestic settings as well. So unfortunately, the COVID impact, and I'm not using COVID as an excuse here, it did have a huge impact on those plans to the extent of about an 18-month delay to that from obviously when we started that work back in 2018, 2019. So assuringly, we did learn quite a lot of lessons through the COVID period in terms of how we could deliver a more agile fire investigation model, and we've captured that learning. So however, with all that said, I am pleased to report that last week SLT approved a new fire investigation model, and that will now be getting rolled out for implementation at the start of the next financial year. And to pick up your specific point around about the consequences, the only consequence of this delay, Leslie, has been a financial consequence because of the overstaffing element within fire investigation, but that has been subsumed across my service delivery budget, so it's not had an overall impact in terms of the organisation. So, and that's essentially the only consequence. We've still maintained a fire investigation model. It's still been really effective, and it's still held in really high regard across the criminal justice system. And we've had a number of really high-profile and successful cases where we've supported the Procurator Fiscal and our police colleagues as well. So I'll pause at that, Leslie. Hopefully that answers your question.
Comprehensively. Many thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Malcolm?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mark. Very happy with the overall progress report and progress and so on the reading. I suppose the thing I wonder about a little bit is this is titled the Risk and Performance Management Report, and I kind of can't see the wood for the trees or something. There's something I can't quite see. When I look at the detail of, for example, the RDS one, we've got 4 green stars, that's making good progress, that's fine. But I think there is still a risk there about being able to recruit RVDS staff and how we're going forward with that I don't really see coming across. So I think I know we deal with risk elsewhere in more detail, and I know you're saying that it's evolving, but I just saw it as a kind of largely a progress report against projects, against actions, and I wondered if we'd lost a bit of the flavour of where kind of the risks are. And if you read this in isolation, you'd kind of go, a lot of this is going well, making progress, but there is still an underlying risk there. So I don't know, but I felt there was something a little bit missing there, and I think that's maybe a bit of a ramble, but hope it makes some sense.
Before I bring Mark in on that, I think Brian specifically coming in on with a perspective around that point. So Brian, please come in now.
Yeah, thank you. And Malcolm, I mean, your point is well made, and we have in fact made this point on a number of occasions. And in Mark's introduction, he referred to the ongoing work to develop the template output reports from the risk management system, which once they're refined will find their way into this, so that we truly do have an integrated risk and performance management report. And I think, Mark, if I heard you correctly, the ambition is to have that in place for the next financial year.
Mark, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, thank you. No, that's helpful.
Oh, you're still on mute, Mark.
Apologies. I was going to say much the same as Brian said, and I was going to ask Brian to also speak to some of the detail, because we've had off-table discussions about some of this. I say we've got a plan in place for how we'll now bring that both to ARAC, which does the detailed work on this, but how that will reflect itself through into the higher level summary. So your points are well made, Malcolm, and it's certainly something we've had discussions around with Brian in his chair capacity.
Thank you.
Helpful, thank you. Any additional comments or questions on this report? No, content on that basis that we have scrutinised it. Lovely, thank you. And just as an aside before we move into the next item, which is risk themes, Ali has been super diligent and has checked, and normally when our finance reports come to us, they do say that we scrutinise them, and that on this occasion it was the substitution of a word rather than our content. So well done to Eagle Eyes Baden in spotting that particular issue, but it was an issue of word transcription rather than governance. So well done, thank you. We've got the risk themes. I haven't identified any additional risks that have emerged as a result of the discussion and debate during the meeting. However, I'm opening it up to other board members in case you specifically have. SLT colleagues, as always, are also welcome to comment. No? Okay, nothing to capture. So we've had an opportunity to do that. That takes us then into the forward plan. And Ali, you've got an opportunity just to say anything you need to say on this.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing further to add than is detailed. Only point being the special board meeting now that we're looking to put in place on the 30th of September to specifically look at the long-term visual consultation and bring that back to the board formally in that context. So thank you, Chair.
Fab, thank you. Noting the date of the next meeting on the 28th of October, with obviously the special meeting to be arranged in between the two, that I believe brings us to the end of this public board meeting, unless there's any other indication of that. So with that, I will formally thank you all for your attendance and your contribution, including the attendance of our observers. You are very welcome. And close this meeting, and the board and other invited relevant people will now attend the very brief private session on the board on the separate link. So thank you, and I will see some of you again shortly.